Welcome to Walks and Talks. I'm using some slightly new tech here today, seeing if this microphone through my ear works, so hopefully it's a bit clearer. I got such a huge response to the last video and podcast on how we choose our church family, if it draws us or repels us based on family dysfunction and family models that we were given as we grew up. And so we talked about the 3 rules of dysfunctional families. I can clarify. The first one was don't trust. Yeah. And then it was don't think. And then it was don't feel. And if you come from a don't trust kind of environment, you may be more attracted to something which allows you to be able to trust a church service or a worship service process, something that is predictable and certain and trustworthy, like a liturgical one, e.g. a Catholic Mass or something like that, where it's trustworthy if you came from a home which had don't think, and then you find a family that allows you, church family or expression of worship style, that allows you and encourages you and celebrates thinking, like in an evangelical kind of thing, then you will enjoy, perhaps be drawn to something like that. And the same thing goes with don't feel. You might find yourself drawn to something like a Pentecostal or charismatic thing where it's unpredictable. So, I mean, if you take the opposites of that, if you grew up in an environment where you were told not to trust and you learned not to trust, and not trusting was a mechanism, then of course, why on earth would people rolling around, speaking in tongues, waving flags, singing for 40 minutes one service and 20 minutes the next, and then having a sloppy sermon with no Bible references? That is unpredictable, therefore unsafe, therefore can't be trusted. So, I mean, if you look at things in that light, of course, it can be confronting. And a lot of people wrote some really interesting comments and feedback, both in private and in public, on the YouTube video. You can see it there on my channel, but also on a Instagram and Facebook post where I put the chart up as well. It really resonated with some people. I had a lovely person talk about how they brought their very conservative mother to a Pentecostal service, and she said that her mum said, this, of course God doesn't like this can't be trusted. And then she took her to a very standard, very white liturgical predictable thing, and she was like, this is what God likes. And isn't it fascinating how we take all our personal preferences, we take our own dysfunction which we built lives around, we take our personal preferences, and then we rope God into it and say, this is what he likes, this is what he doesn't like. You go to the Pentecostal church and they quote something in Psalms, praise the Lord with loud banging and cymbals. Meanwhile, people with sensitive nervous systems are having heart attacks in the pews. I mean, we take a preference and we make it a rule. We are so good at that. That is, it makes us feel powerful, right? And then you rope God into it, and like we're better than him, we're talking on his behalf and saying what he would do and what he wouldn't do and what he'd like and wouldn't like. Even though scripture is full of different contradictions and things we thought God said. And it's funny. Anyway, I thought I would extrapolate more around this topic for you, around dysfunction. Now, there's a term you may like to look up. It is ACDF, which is an adult child of a dysfunctional family. Somebody in one of the comments said, are all families dysfunctional? I would say yes and no. Yes, every family has a level of dysfunction. And like everything that happens on a spectrum, there is a tipping point where it becomes problematic, where it becomes pathological, where it becomes something that is worth noting. So many things happen on spectrums, and I think it's some people hate this. I like labels. I do. I'm a words guy. I love poetry. I like to investigate. I like to learn, and therefore, I really do like definition, because our words help us build our world. It gives us handles. We can put words to things which we experience, and that allows us to examine those things, to tweak those things, etc. So I like how stuff happens on a spectrum, personally speaking. If that's not for you, maybe this podcast's not for you. But it happens on a spectrum, and the dysfunction, and I can say that it happens on a spectrum because everybody has a level of dysfunction, right? You and I have levels of us that do not function according to the way they can, the way that, and again, this becomes relative, just to jump in there. What is dysfunctional in one circle is not dysfunctional in another, but by way of definition, we all have dysfunction, but particularly dysfunctional families that are touched by addiction or generational trauma. And I love the work that everyone's doing around trauma at the moment. Become far more trauma informed. Yeah, it swings the other way and everyone blames it for everything, but it is a big deal. And so if you grow up if you're an adult child of a dysfunctional family, another terms are adult children of alcoholics, ACOA. So if you're ACDF, adult children of dysfunctional family, if there's dysfunction at home, what often happens is we end up playing particular family roles. Now, over the years and studies and research and psychology work around this has allowed us to look at these. I want to see if I can show you these dogs here. Look at these dogs. They're just not happy. Look at those things. Little Frenchies. See what you miss out on if I'm just in the studio. Cyclists and dogs. So, all right, let's jump into this. In families, systems, the way we often survive and get by is we play particular roles. Now, these roles have been labeled in many different ways. I'm going to use some language out of that particular book, which is The Secrets of Your Family Tree by David Carder, C-A-R-D-E-R, with a link in the show notes. Very interesting book. I don't know if it's still in print. Went out a while ago, but was in a combination work of several authors. Just insightful sort of work. And what they did was they began to map the roles people play in dysfunctional families and say how these could be considered in the context of a church family. I'm going to give you a couple examples. And in some of the work, and I'll talk about this another time, some of the study and interest I've had around archetypal work, Jungian archetypes like king, warrior, lover, magician, etc. These are all archetypes. And so we take on these archetypal roles as if with our family, if you can imagine your family is a drama system, it's a movie with different roles, and you decide, even if it's not true to you, to play a character in that family system because the family system requires it, and you decide you need this to survive. And sometimes you do need to do these particular things. So these things can be like you're the joker or the jester, where you have that person in your family system who, when things get heated, they can crack a joke. These people can be great comedians. In fact, if you look behind a lot of witty comedians, you find sometimes a dysfunctional family role, and this is the role that they played. They became very efficient at it. You know, how do we break down a very awkward and difficult situation? Well, it's easy to make everybody laugh, to play the fool, to do something silly. You have the noble martyr, the martyr who just lays down their life for everything. You know, if it's a female, she'll play the mum. You have the distant child who just keeps to themselves and stays very disengaged and disconnected and in their room, and they're no problem because they are invisible. That's sometimes called the invisible child. I'm just going to clean the screen here. So there are a few things. So in this book, they give a few examples of these family roles, and I'll go through a few for you. One of them is the overly responsible member of the family, and really they are what in other definitions might be called the noble martyrs. They just, they move from a dysfunctional family role in a church. I want you to think about this for those who've been part of church communities, regardless of denomination. Actually, you'll often find these people. I can see them. I can see them, and I have been this member before. Very responsible, volunteering ridiculous hours. Yeah, giving up their entire life. Missionaries, people that feel called to missions, which we did as well, also do this. There is a deep sense of self-forgetting and self-sacrifice, of identity, passion and desire, and wants and needs, and it's all laid down for the family system or for the family church. And it's important to them because this also becomes familiar. You ask how many of those people played this role growing up. How many were the eldest sibling? How many were the overly responsible sibling who raised their sisters and brothers? Who were the ones that, when there's a family event, you ring them. They play this overly responsible, noble martyr and until they've had enough and they lose their shit and they realize it's time to get off the cross because we're running out of wood. And that's the overly responsible person. They just love labor, They're always working hard. And churches are filled with these people, often very codependent. And I can say this with a big smile on my face because I'm a recovering rescuer. I know what it's like to do this. Right now I'm thinking, am I doing this podcast now because I'm still stuck in the system? That's for me to investigate. I'm going to tell you, one of the reasons I like this is because I can externalize, which helps me. I've got nothing to lose, and I've actually got quite a sore hip and leg at the moment, have for a few months, and walking and talking like this has really been helpful for me to just keep moving, and gives me an excuse to put stuff down on paper. It's just as important for me as it is for you listening, actually, but I have to keep checking myself. Why am I doing this? Well, I'm really doing this because I enjoy it. But these people will do it even if they don't enjoy it. They'll do it because if they stop laboring and they stop being the martyr, that they'll be excluded. You're no longer a member of this family. And churches are full of these people. They're often codependent, these overly responsible people. And it works, man. It works. You fill the church with these kind of people, and it works. I see some pastors, they just have this magnetic ability to be pseudo-fathers and mothers of families, and they draw all these people to them, and they move church, and they follow them. There's almost this stereotype that I see it. Often these people stay very single for a very long time. They can be loyal to these pastors and ministers, even if they're abusive. Like, it's really quite sad, but it's so common, you just see it. And it happens in family, homes and systems too that are dysfunctional. What's interesting, and I'll talk about this too with each of them, if you leave that system and you find healing, man, pastors aren't happy. People aren't sure what you're doing. what you're going to do. And sometimes the easiest thing for these people is just to really leave altogether, or a crisis comes and they just can't serve anymore. So many of these people end up burnt out, which also makes them a better martyr. I've been here since 6 a.m. I did this. Eventually, they can become very bitter to be around, and they're always freaking complaining, even though they freaking keep doing everything. Oh, I'm going to do the communion. No one else is doing it. Just don't freaking do it. Let it fall apart. I'm enjoying hearing pastors and leaders who are more trauma-informed and very aware of this dynamic nowadays saying, you know what? If you really don't want to do it and you can't do it and you're just fulfilling an old family role, don't do it here. You don't need to. If we don't have music this Sunday, if no one's going to do communion, everybody will know. I know a pastor once who had to bump in and bump out of a building, and which meant everybody had to go set up the chairs and the sound systems, and no one would volunteer in this particular community Baptist church here on the coast, and this pastor, basically one Sunday, everybody poured into the building and no chairs were set up and no sound system was set up, and so he basically stood on a chair and he said, I just want everybody to know and feel what it's like to be here in a church, in a church service where everything's done for you when you come in. And I've been calling out for volunteers, and I told our team, who've been working tirelessly for years and dwindling in numbers, to not bother this week so everybody knows what you do, so that everybody misses it. He says, this is not good enough. You speak about being a community and a family, and you're basically turning up for a meal and going away. He says, it's actually, I just want you to know what it feels like and what you're given week after week. And it's in a bit of a shockwave. The guy's an Enneagram 8, by the way, which if you know the Enneagram, he's the challenger. And it was a great illustration. The noble martyrs, the overly responsible people need, would feel the weight of that. But I think that's important. Okay, so this overly responsible person. The other one is the acting out member or the rebel. And you often have this in a family, dysfunctional family, or families. There's that kid or two kids that are just the rebels. They just act out. They get the attention by doing the bad stuff. They act out. They're the troublemakers. They're the people in the church communities where everyone says, but it wasn't for Fred, or it wasn't for Sarah, everything would be all right. They're the people they talk about. Sometimes they end up on leadership positions and they're shit stirrers. Like they are just in trouble. They might be like it often happens with music teams, like they're really good musos. And then they're like, I'm just turning up late. I'm just not going to wear shoes when you're in a church that wears shoes. They're troublemakers. They say inappropriate things. They just want attention, which is the role they played growing up because, they were troublemakers. That one's pretty straightforward. These people are just the rebels. They stick around, though, and they feel the role that they play is important. And sometimes they feel things are getting too boring and too stale and not mutating and changing enough, so they cause trouble. This is just the role they've played. It's how they got everybody's attention. And one of the challenges and one of the things that these people may not heal from in a church family context, because again, you have to understand that we have these unmet needs and unfinished business. So many people, when they walk into faith-based communities, have unfinished business. They have unmet needs. And then the church family community plays a family dynamic, right? And then church pastors and leaders play parental roles. It's just projected onto them. And if they don't find it there, I'm walking past a sports field and sports club now. I've seen this happen in sports clubs, workplaces. I've seen people in workplaces say, I'm not your dad. I'm not your mum. This is not your family. Go and get your stuff sorted. So to jump back to the rebel, what happens when they get healed is they don't know. they have trouble. They have trouble feeling like they're seen anymore. And even if they're going on a healing journey and have started to do a lot of work, people still treat them like troublemakers, which becomes really problematic. This is a big thing, just generally speaking. If you are committed to saying yes to the invitation of change and the way that you evolve and mutate and transform through whatever way you do that, people around you who may not be changing or tracking with you may not be used to the new you and still treat you like the old you. This happens with particular adults. It happens in my family system, my extended family, parents, and brothers and sisters. We all change, and I don't know what my brother or sister have got up to in the last 6 months or what they're going through, what they've decided. We don't really share it. And so in these kind of systems, because you have to understand, even if you are if you are an adult child dysfunctional family, if that's your background, most of them are shy to change because this is how they've always been. This is the role they've always played. But if they do, one of the challenges that rebels do face is that they still get picked on and blamed for a particular thing. I don't know what it is, man. I don't know if it was like this for you at school, but there was always that kid who, the teacher's writing something on the blackboard and then something happens behind them and they turn around and they're like, Robert! And he's like, what, miss what? And everyone laughs. And Robert was doing nothing, but for some reason, he's the one that played that role, So that happens, and that makes change hard, but I think it's necessary too. So that's the rebel. So we've gone through the overly responsible person, we've gone through the child that acts out, the person that acts out, the troublemaker. Sometimes these are youth pastors as well. Anyway, then you have the mascots, right? And these people are part of their job. They're like the pets of the church, and they have blinders on. They refuse to see anything bad is happening, and they just want everybody to stay there and belong. They talk about things that need to change sometimes, but they're toxically positive, even about stuff. They're terribly loyal, even if they're abusive. They're like, they call it being forgiving, but they're overlooking. They're not labor. They're not the martyr people, right? Because the noble martyrs or the overly responsible can tend to complain a little bit and get bitter later on, but these people don't. They freaking don't do much at all. There's no labor. They don't do it themselves. They become like these fan people. And some cultures are really built off them. Particularly, I'm going to pick it because this is terribly honest. I've seen this in some church cultures, and to understand that I've got a degree in leadership. I've very, stuff around culture and change culture and organizational development. This is kind of some of my wheelhouse and some of my academic work. So I say this trying to put a little bit of weight on it. Cultures ultimately are, I'll talk about all this another time maybe, cultures are based on four elements. They are this, and culture says this is how we behave. They're based on four elements: the stories we tell, the language we use, the rites and rituals that we have, and the heroes that we have. So language and symbols, rites and rituals, heroes, that people that we esteem and we talk about. Let's get Fred up here. Fred's been just quietly serving the church. Why don't you put your hand together for Fred? Fred's the noble martyr. Finally, after 16 years of serving and putting out chairs, somebody pays freaking attention, but the church is trying to get more volunteers. And they start, if you esteem voluntary work and volunteers who work for nothing and are noble martyrs are esteemed, then guess what everybody wants to be. So Hillsong have done a great at this. Part of their culture in a lot of Pentecostal churches, for example, have been, I think, I'm not discounting the move of Spirit at all, but another part that has broken apart those who have grown and really been a movement has to move and grow for it to be called a movement, so to speak. So some of those churches that have been part of these movements have a great culture around volunteering, and they call it servanthood. If you're a servant, you got a servant's heart. You got a servant's heart. Yeah. You got a servant's heart, Dave. Thanks, man. I really love how you serve. Why don't we come up? So it's all about serving, and if with a lot of, you can build great things with a lot of people that are actively involved and committed to doing that, missionary organizations, etc. So church cultures are built off that, and places like Hillsong and other Pentecostal churches, the ACC movement in Australia. I'm sure that there are plenty. I think Bill Hybels' church in Chicago and others. I know those names are a little bit tarnished now, but these people are still very good leaders. Objectively speaking, in many ways, we tarnish them for some of their sexual escapades, etc. And I'm not saying all that's good and right, etc. But just to put that aside for one moment, because again, we have very big expectations upon the morality of pastors and leaders. You can be the president of the United States and go see Monica Lewinsky and stay president, but you can't pastor a church and to have done the same thing. So far, I think that's all changing. But good leaders, these people know how to rally volunteers. Yep. And so these people require these mascots who will rally for them. They may not do the work, but Hillsong has great mascots, for example, people that genuinely love it. And there's nothing wrong with that. Again, there's nothing wrong with that. But some people, as I've met over the years in different churches and circles, huge mascots. There's a lot of people that are mascots of the Catholic Church and the Pope. This is great. This is just what it is. I'm not here out of judgment. I hope you hear this out. These are just roles that we play because these people are just out there for belonging. All right, final one in our dysfunctional members are the adjusting members. These are sometimes the ones who are known in other family system words as invisible children. They keep to themselves. They'll just adjust and go to with whatever they want. They don't want to rock the boat. They'll be found in their room, reading a book, staying out of trouble, staying out of sight, staying out of mind. And these people just turn up. They may pay their tithe. They're not volunteering always, but then they disappear. These people often have a low commitment as well. Low commitment to things. I've seen these people, and trust me, when you're the noble martyr and you're the overly responsible one, or you're the pet, these people, you freaking hate them. They turn up. I don't even know if they give. They don't help with anything, and then they're gone, and then they come back, and then they're gone, and they're just spiritual tapeworms. They're just entitled assholes. I don't know the label you give them, but these people are often adjusting. They don't want to cause trouble. If I serve, I may fail. Right? They just turn up, and that's a role. Not able to actually put your hand up and say, yeah, I'll help. Not seeing the value in yourself because it was never given to you. You just found, if you stayed under the radar, hopped in and out, were pretty invisible, and just adjusted to whatever the situation was, that things would be okay. And that's all you want. All these things are built around safety and protection and deep survival mechanisms. They're in and out, and they're just like the disconnected child. And one of the challenges, if they begin to heal, these people begin to heal, they're they're not sure what role they play, because then they stick around. And then, they've been so-called flaky, and then they're like, actually, I'd like to serve. And other people like, serve? I don't know if you give, like what? Who are you? And so this also poses a problem. So anyway, these are, I'm just trying to see how long we've gone for. It's quite a long one. But anyway, they're the roles of some dysfunctional family roles that are played out in church families. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you've seen. Let me know if you've been in these roles. I'm interested to know what healing has looked like as you've seen this and been aware of this and hopped out of this system as well. And maybe church has not been your experience, but maybe you've had this in sports clubs or workplaces. Maybe you're a pastor or leader and you've seen this play out, and you have ways in which you mitigate people from falling into those roles as well. I just say also, the church does use a lot of familial language, and in Scripture it goes back to a good friend of mine, Gary Grant, wrote a book called Doing Church as Family, and he kind of unpacks all this stuff, but really pushes it that to grow family, it's a slow birth. To grow family, you concentrate on people's health and well-being. To grow a family, a church family, in this way is to be a safe harbor, and then to begin to ask key questions that cause people to grow into who God has created them to be as their healthy and full selves. And so moving from a dysfunctional to a functional family also requires very functional and aware teachers and leadership teams, people who have lived life, people who have parented and raised children, so to speak, people who are, in the truest sense, elders who have a huge capacity to love themselves, who have looked after and raised a family and now have the capacity to not run a big organization, but to actually foster a community and raise people into functional adulthood. And that takes a lot of, more than many churches may be willing to do as far as work goes. But I think if it's done right, and it is done in a healthy way, and it is possible, and I believe, and I've seen it, glints of it around, then these things can be healing communities. The wholeness and the openness and the sharing and the vulnerability needed towards healing also, though, creates an environment that can be a little too confronting from people from dysfunctional families, because they're shy of change and they don't know what it would be like if they were to change and play a different role in life or in a family system, or project expectations differently, or actually deal with their own stuff. Because depending on the role that they played, may require them to have to confront some very difficult things beneath them and within them. And that kind of growth, honestly, can take many, many years and a lifetime to adjust to as you evolve, as you become and walk into, if I can use a biblical term, into the fullness of Christ within you, the fullness of who God has created you uniquely to be, and then what role you would play, if one, in the life and the family and the spiritual family and community you're part of. All right, love to hear from you. Cheers.